Hello everyone, how you doing? I'm Colonel Gallagher again. Let me turn my volume up a little bit. It's Colonel Gallagher, and we're on a little bit of a situation here now, aren't we? And so I'm going to give you the next installment leading up to the Civil War, and this would be the Dred Scott case. And the Dred Scott case deserves its own place in all these issues we're looking at, these events, because the Dred Scott case probably was the most raucous and difficult one. And what it did is it brought together all these other issues, these questions of can slavery expand, really, is the key question. But more important, the Dred Scott case angered the Republican Party and really gave the Republican Party a tremendous motive, and especially a main person that we're eventually going to get to know, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln had quite a bit to say regarding the Dred Scott case. It really brought Lincoln back into the main center of politics as he ran for not president yet, but ran for the Senate of Illinois against Stephen Douglas. We met Douglas once before with the Missouri Compromise, or the Compromise of 1850, excuse me, it wasn't that old. The Compromise of 1850, where Douglas ended up getting all those parts through. And Douglas stood behind an idea called popular sovereignty, which basically Douglas, along with a guy named Lewis Cass from Michigan, had championed the idea of popular sovereignty. Basically, means let the people decide. So if slavery was going to go here or there, wherever, the people could decide. And if they wanted it, they could have it, like the Kansas and Nebraska issue, which Douglas was mired in. So if the people of Kansas wanted slavery, by golly, let it be so. Popular sovereignty removed it basically from the center stage of congressional debate, and it just threw it into the people's lap. It's democracy run amok, and if the people wanted it, they could have it. Now, why I'm bringing this up so much and beating up on it is it's going to come into a conflict with the Dred Scott case, and Lincoln's going to realize this, and he's going to catch Douglas with this. I'll get to that in a minute. What we need to understand is there's a couple series of events that have led up to the Dred Scott case. One is the Wilmot Proviso, if you remember, during the War with Mexico, which was the idea that slavery should not and cannot go into the territories won from the Mexicans in this war. That is an idea of slavery cannot expand. Two, the second big one is the Free Soil Party was created. It's a literally good term to understand. The idea that any other soil out west must be free soil, in other words, not slave soil, meaning the Free Soil Party, do not confuse them as they were emancipators. They're very racist when you read the Free Soilers, and they're basically saying we don't want those blacks around us. That's basically the way to read it. But the idea that what's in conflict here is the issue of slavery. It just is totally against the American idea of somebody working the land, owning the land, as Lincoln would later say, and I said it in an earlier cast, is that as I work by the sweat of my brow, that is my bread, I have the right to eat it. But how can a slave do that? A slave works and the bread goes to someone else. This is absolutely un-American in Lincoln's view, and it goes against every principle that the American foundations were based on. That's the Free Soil Party, which is going to become the nucleus, really, for, in a lot of ways, this mismatch of different parties that became known as the Republican Party. The Fugitive Slave Act, we mentioned before, where if a slave ran away, not only could the owner rightfully go up and get the slave wherever they were in the United States, but by law, the local officials had to detain the slave and return the slave, and even you as a citizen, if you're up in the North, would have to help. This agitates because in this case, you are now involved directly with the institution of slavery. Even if you're as far north as Wisconsin or even the state of Maine, it doesn't matter. That's why you see a lot of blacks at that period of time, 1850s especially, going up into Canada and trying to get away from the United States, which is weird, isn't it? Now you think about it. And then finally, we last left off with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is opening up those territories in the West, put the railroad down on that northern route. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act was the idea of opening up Kansas and then a separate one called Nebraska. And Douglas pulled a rabbit out of the hat on that one and got it done, got it through Congress. But it opened up this idea of bleeding Kansas. Remember, we're talking about that. So all these issues now led to 1857 Supreme Court decision the Dred Scott case. Now, what was this about? Okay, so why all these pieces matter. The Missouri Compromise line is important in understanding the Dred Scott case, and as well as can slavery expand, free states versus slave states. There was a man named Dr. John Emerson, and John Emerson was out of Missouri. He owned Dred Scott, a slave. Dr. John Emerson spent some time he was a military, an army doctor, so he traveled in Illinois. Illinois was a free state. Illinois barred slavery, did not want it, and so Dred Scott was with Emerson. By that standard, was then Dred Scott free. Furthermore, Emerson also spent some time up in Wisconsin. Wisconsin absolutely rejected the idea of slavery as well. So once again, was Dred Scott a citizen? Was Dred Scott free because he'd been above the Missouri Compromise line? So in other words, there's three questions that come before the Dred Scott case. One, was Scott free due to being in a free state? One. Two, was Scott free and could he sue for his freedom, basically, because was Scott a citizen is the question now. Had he gained citizenship, in other words, by being in a free state? And the third question, the more important question, what in the world was on the whole stage, because this was big, was the Missouri Compromise then constitutional or not? Now, lo and behold, the Supreme Court, here we are in our era today of 2020, the Supreme Court ruled large in this. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was a man who was appointed by Andrew Jackson himself before Andrew Jackson left office, a guy named Roger Taney, T-A-N-E-Y. Roger Taney was a Marylander. He had owned slaves, but he had actually freed his slaves. You want to look this up. But Taney certainly was nobody pushing for equality. And the Taney court ruled 6-3, if I'm right, as that no was the answer to all three. One, was Scott free because he'd been in a free state? They said nope. Could Scott sue as a citizen? Nope. He didn't have any rights to citizenship, even though that one is really crucial and controversial because some states in the North allowed blacks to vote. In some states, it was a state issue, in other words. In some states, did accept blacks as citizens. Ironically, black men could vote and be seen as citizens before for a lot of white women. And so it's interesting. It's state by state. And so there's no national sense to this, but now that's what Taney's basically saying. That's why that second one's interesting. And the third one, though, when you think about this more, if Scott goes to a free state, he's not free. Okay, what about the Missouri Compromise line? And Taney answered it for everybody. Oh, no, not at all. So the Missouri Compromise line he was arguing is absolutely unconstitutional. Now, if you think on this for a minute, if you're a Northerner, this is absurd to you. You're saying, wait a second. We put that Missouri Compromise line in for a purpose, free and slave. And now what Taney is saying on a national basis is slavery can go anywhere it wants. This pen is my property. That's what it's basically saying. These are not human beings, they're property. And wherever I go, my property is my property according to the Constitution. That's where it lands. This is unacceptable in the Yankees' terms. This is what Lincoln's going to think. And it just makes no sense. It made no sense to a point where there's a couple events we need to look at. The first one is the 1858 election. That's congressional elections. And congressional elections are more interesting to look at than presidential. And as Dr. Farley, my colleague, has said, and I agree, it is far easier to understand the congressional elections and predict them than the presidential in a lot of ways. And so here we go in the 1858 congressional elections. The reason to look at it is the Republicans gained 26 seats in Congress, all in the North, obviously. And the Democrats lost some seats, all in the North. This is a sectional party. And this party, the Republican Party, is starting to gain momentum in the North. This is agitating the Southerners. They're starting to take careful notice of this, that even though the Democrats still controlled the Senate, even though the Democrats felt comfortable in the presidential election of 1856, the Democrats are going to get James Buchanan. He's a Democrat. He's a Northerner, but he's all Northern, all Democrat. Presidents had been very favorable to the South, to their ways and to the slave system, not wanting to muddy the waters with that. And so now the South is starting to worry about this and be concerned. It's going to lead to other problems. Now, why Stephen A. Douglas and Lincoln loom large in the Dred Scott? Because popular sovereignty. When Lincoln ran for the Senate in Illinois, he debated Douglas on 7 occasions. And there's some of these speeches that Lincoln gave that are very, very important. And the Peoria speech would be one I would look up because it's not too lengthy. You can find it pretty simple and Google it. The Peoria. It's a place in Illinois. And the other one would be the Springfield speech. These were all in 1858, as Lincoln would debate Douglas. And the more important one, though, is the Freeport speech. Freeport, it became known as the Freeport Doctrine. Lincoln knew that Douglas supported popular sovereignty. And so Lincoln then was going to put a trap there for him. Lincoln basically asked Douglas, how can you have both? Either the Dred Scott case and the ruling by, Tawney was correct, that slavery can go wherever it wants and no one can stop it. The Missouri Compromise line is unconstitutional, so you can't bar it. Or the people can decide and they can bar it themselves. How can it be both? Douglas, of course, Lincoln knew is what his response would be, because here you are in Illinois, and Douglas wanted to be the senator of Illinois. He had to sell out one of them, and which Douglas did. He sold out the South. Now I'll get to why this matters in a minute. Douglas said, of course, popular sovereignty, the people can decide if they don't want it. Oh my, that got newspaper. This is big press. People followed Douglas Lincoln debates. They wrote it down. In the South, they read it. This was big newspaper press, big debates. And the Americans hung on this. This is where Lincoln's going to start kind of finding his way. And the idea here is that Douglas sold out the South. So the Southern Democrats now said, well, we'll never support this man because Douglas's aspirations was like anybody else at that period of time, I want to be president. In other words, the way I put it always is this way, Douglas won the battle, but Lincoln would win the war. Okay, you can use that. Feel free. This is my own. You can look at it either way because Lincoln's going to win eventually. This is going to hurt Douglas, and it's going to split the Democratic Party when you get to the election of 1860. And the election of 1860 is a very contested election in which there's a four-horse race. And because of the Democratic ticket being split, Lincoln's going to actually not win a majority, but win the presidency. So this is huge. This 1858 Freeport Doctrine, this 1858 decision by Douglas is very significant. Lincoln didn't have to make that kind of a choice. Lincoln, the Springfield speech, which is also worthwhile to look up, as well as the Freeport Doctrine, but the Springfield speech, as Lincoln went into the notion, what he always did, about the Declaration of Independence. He's always about the Declaration of Independence whenever you read Lincoln. He seemed to like that document a lot for a good reason. And Lincoln said, because the debate from the South, and the debate by Douglas had been the idea that the Founding Fathers didn't mean really all men. It didn't apply to everybody. The South, my favorite guy is John C. Calhoun. I'm being very sarcastic. John C. Calhoun was notorious for saying this, that the founders didn't get it right. The formula's not right. It didn't mean all men, didn't apply to everybody. Lincoln said he disagreed. He said they said all men, basically. He said, but we're all equal in all respects. No, goes back to kind of that word no again, because think about it. We're not all equal in all respects anyway. I'm not tall, I'm not equal in that respect. But we all don't have that. But we are equal, Lincoln said, in three ways. Those inalienable rights. Life, which is very self-explanatory, I suspect. Liberty, and then the last one, the pursuit of happiness, is the one that's really the most interesting. And that goes back to that free soil ideology in a way, that I have the right to use my talents to the best of my ability, as well as you do, in order to pursue to the greatest good. That doesn't give you rights to just do whatever you want. Please understand that. It's within a certain contextual frame for society. But there is this idea that those rights, Lincoln said, must be true. Lincoln went on about the Declaration of Independence repeatedly. And the funny part to me is if you take those wonderful words of the Declaration of Independence, that second paragraph, the preambles, as it's called, you got the introduction, which is when in the course of human events. That second part is the preamble, the idea of these inalienable rights. All men are created equal, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It's a very unbelievably shocking thing because it's near perfection. But this is in order to form more perfect union. It does arch with the Constitution in a way. That is the hope, and that's what Lincoln saw. Now, did Lincoln say blacks and whites are equal? No, he did not. I'm going to say that emphatically. He argued that the races should be separated. But if you study Lincoln and follow Lincoln, okay, and the book to read is by David Herbert Donald. He's the great Lincoln biographer. It's just called Lincoln. It's wonderful. The other one I'd recommend, it's the one I always keep a copy of here, is A Fiery Trial. This is the book by Foner, Pulitzer Prize. I would recommend it. I would get it for Christmas. You can probably find it much cheaper than when I bought it, but it was worth every penny. And, here we are. So, think on this, that in the course of our country, so many have said so much that means so much to us. This is what matters. It's not color. It's not race. It's not religion. It's none of this. It's the freedoms. It's not freedom from alone. It's freedom of. And that alone is what I guess I find kind of disturbing knowing history. We tend to blind ourselves so ambitiously because we're so concerned about things that are supposedly greater than these ideas, but it is these ideas that make us who we are. Any other logic, as Calhoun had or Douglas had, is just unthinkable and unimaginable. I'm the second generation immigrant. My grandfather came from Ireland, and I don't want to get into that, but he came from Ireland, and the idea was not to deceive Americans, undermine, subvert it. It's the same reason you come up out of slavery. It's the same reason you come across the ocean at tremendous risk. It's the same reason people yearn for the goodness of the country. It offers an idea and ideas that are unlike anything else. It is the last best hope of mankind, as Lincoln said. It cannot ever, ever be sacrificed. Otherwise, the opposite, as Lincoln said, is true: tyranny. It is for all, not for some, regardless of your station in life. But it is for all to do something. It's not necessarily free, as my very deep colleague and mentor, who's retired unfortunately now, Colonel Hitchcock, said, freedom isn't free. It's true.